To change a vote? If not, on this vote, the yeas are 36, the nays are 61. Under the previous order requiring 60 votes for the adoption of this amendment, the amendment is not agreed to. Under the previous order, the motion to reconsider is considered made and laid upon the table. Under the previous order, the clerk will read the bill for the third time.
Calendar number 167, H.R. 2887, an act to provide an extension of surface and air transportation programs and for other purposes.
Under the previous order, the question is on the passage of H.R. 2887. Is there a sufficient second? There appears to be. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka. Mr. Alexander. Ms. Ayotte. Mr. Barrasso. Mr. Baucus. Mr. Beckidge. Mr. Bennett. Mr. Bingaman. Mr. Blumenthal. Mr. Blunt. Mr. Bozeman. To do every day.
I'm going to run.
Mrs. Boxer. Mr. Brown of Massachusetts. Mr. Brown of Ohio. Mr. Burr. Ms. Cantwell.
That was in June.
Mr. Cardin.
But it was funny. It was very
Mr. Carper. Mr. Casey. Mr. Chambliss. Mr. Coates. Mr. Coburn. Mr. Cochran. Ms. Collins. Mr. Conrad. Mr. Coons.
Kathy, I'm
Mr. Corker. Mr. Cornyn. Mr. Crapo.
Kathy.
Mr. Dement. Mr. Durbin. Mr. Enzi. Mrs. Feinstein. Mr. Franken. Mrs. Gillibrand. Mr. Graham. Mr. Grassley. Mrs. Hagan.
I don't have one.
Mr. Harkin.
I'm not sure.
Mr. Hatch.
Sure it's not being.
Mr. Heller. Mr. Hoven. Mrs. Hutchison. Mr. Inhofe. Mr. No Way.
Yes. Yep.
Mr. Isaacson.
Yeah, my team.
Mr. Johann. Mr. Johnson of Wisconsin.
I'm not a Mac person.
Mr. Johnson of South Dakota.
I don't
Mr. Carey.
I have an iPod, but that's it. Maybe that's me.
Mr. Kirk. Ms. Klobuchar. Mr. Cole. Mr. Kyle. Ms. Landrieu.
Can do it.
Mr. Lautenberg. Mr. Leahy.
Basically, to do that.
Mr. Lee.
I'm going to explain why.
Mr. Levin.
When I got my iPod,
Mr. Lieberman.
just think that his
Mr. Lugar. Mr. Manchin.
and I got a new computer.
Mr. McCain. Mrs. McCaskill.
And then my new iPhone,
Mr. McConnell.
iPad,
Mr. Menendez.
it's not easy.
Mr. Merkley. Ms. Mikulski.
First your ex.
Mr. Moran.
I continue
Ms. Murkowski.
Breaking up.
Mrs. Murray.
You have a team.
Mr. Nelson, Nebraska. Mr. Nelson of Florida. Mr. Paul. Mr. Portman. Mr. Pryor. Mr. Reed of Rhode Island. Mr. Reed of Nevada. Mr. Risch. Mr. Roberts. Mr. Rockefeller. Mr. Rubio. Mr. Sanders. Mr. Schumer. Mr. Sessions. Mrs. Shaheen. Mr. Shelby. Ms. Snow. Ms. Stabenow. Mr. Tester. Mr. Thune. Mr. Toomey. Mr. Udall of Colorado. Mr. Udall of New Mexico. Mr. Vitter. Mr. Warner. Mr. Webb. Mr. Whitehouse. Mr. Wicker. Mr. Wyden. Mr. Walker. Senators voting in the affirmative: Akaka, Alexander, Ayotte, Barrasso, Baucus, Beckich, Bennett, Bingaman, Blumenthal, Blunt, Bozeman, Boxer, Brown of Massachusetts, Brown of Ohio, Burr, Cantwell, Cardin, Carper, Casey, Chambliss, Coates, Cochran, Collins, Conrad, Coons, Corker, Cornyn, Crapo, Durbin, Enzi, Feinstein, Franken, Gillibrand, Graham, Grassley, Hagan, Harkin, Hatch, Heller, Hoban, Hutchison, Inhofe, Inouye, Isaacson, Johans, Johnson of South Dakota, Kerry, Kirk, Klobuchar, Kyle, Landrieu, Lautenberg, Leahy, Levin, Lieberman, Lugar, Manchin, McCain, McCaskill, McConnell, Menendez, Merkley, Mikulski, Moran, Murkowski, Murray, Nelson, Nebraska, Nelson of Florida, Portman, Pryor, Reed of Rhode Island, Reed of Nevada, Risch, Roberts, Rockefeller, Sanders, Schumer, Sessions, Shaheen, Shelby, Snow, Stabenow, Tester, Thune, Udall of Colorado, Udall of New Mexico, Vitter, Warner, Webb, Whitehouse, Wicker, and Wyden. Senators voting in the negative: Coburn, DeMint, Johnson of Wisconsin, Lee, Paul, and Toomey.
Senators wishing to vote or to cast a vote? If not, on H.R. 2887, the ayes are 92, the nays are 6. The bill is passed. Under the previous order, the motion to reconsider is considered made and laid upon the table. Senator from Wyoming.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to a period of morning business with senators permitted to speak for up to 10 minutes each, with an exception for myself and the other senator from Wyoming, doing a tribute to Malcolm Wallop, who passed away yesterday, that we might have such time as is needed.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would ask unanimous consent that the Senate now proceed to the consideration of S-Res 268, which was submitted earlier today.
The clerk will report.
S-Res 268, relative to the death of the Honorable Malcolm Wallop, former Senator for the state of Wyoming.
Without objection, the Senate will proceed to the measure.
I'd ask unanimous consent that the resolution be agreed to, the preamble be agreed to, and the motion to reconsider be laid upon the table.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. It was with a mixture of sadness for his loss and gratitude for having known him that I received the news that Malcolm Wallop had passed away yesterday. He was a man of strong principles who served over the years with some truly remarkable people like Dick Cheney and Al Simpson to make up some of the most influential and strongly united state delegations I've ever seen. Those of you who served with him will remember him with a great deal of fondness as one of the greatest warriors for Wyoming and the West that has ever served in the Senate. Whether you agreed with him or not, he earned the respect of those he served with because it was clear that he spoke from the heart with words that reflected his commitment to his home state of Wyoming and our Western way of life. Malcolm was born in New York and later attended and graduated from Yale University. He immediately felt the call to serve his country, and he joined the Army. Then, when his days in the military were over, he returned to his life as a rancher in Wyoming. It was a vocation he took up with great passion as it reflected his love of the land and his enjoyment of the great outdoors. I think those long hours spent on his ranch gave him the time he needed to think about the things that really mattered to him and to plan his future. It must have been there that he began to get his thoughts together and speak his mind on a long list of issues that mattered to him and to all those who shared his political philosophy. It led him on a path over the years that would see him writing a long list of prestigious and popular publications that got him noticed and quoted throughout his long and productive career. Malcolm found his home on his ranch, but he really found his true calling when he ran for and won a seat in the state legislature, first in the House and later on in the Senate. It was in the state legislature that he developed a well-earned reputation for being a thoughtful legislator who became the voice of his constituents as he worked to ensure their concerns were heard and heard clearly on a number of issues that affected them and their daily lives. Encouraged by what he'd been able to do, Malcolm ran for governor, but God needed a legislator, so he lost the primary. Malcolm then set his sights on serving in the United States Senate. He ran against a three-term incumbent. He knew running for the Senate would not be easy, but he was always one who was willing to do whatever was needed to ensure he achieved his objectives. The Senate race proved to be no exception. OSHA, Occupational Safety and Health, had come into being and drafted its first regulations. Malcolm noted the requirements for extensive porta-potties and built an ad that made the point. Of course, we can't show videos on the floor, but I have to describe this ad because it's still considered one of the classics of running for office. The camera first shows a cowboy in a blue work shirt and tattered straw hat saddling and mounting his horse, while the announcer says, "Everywhere you look these days, the federal government is there, telling you what they think, telling you what they think you ought to think, telling you how you ought to do things, setting up rules you can't follow. I think the federal government's going too far. Now they say, if you don't take that portable facility along with you on a roundup, you can't go. At which point you see the cowboy shake his head in disgust, then cut back to a donkey tied behind the cowboy's horse. Strapped on the donkey's back is a portable toilet. The cowboy rides off. That ad got him noticed. That ad got him elected, along with the great ability to explain things. Now, after a spirited campaign, Malcolm proudly took his oath of office and prepared for the challenges that would lie ahead as Wyoming's newest senator. Some may have thought it wise to start up slowly and eventually gain momentum, but not Malcolm. He got right to work and started in on what he'd come here to do. Over the years, he served on a long list of committees, and he had an impact on the work that was done by each and every one of them. They included the Energy and Natural Resources Committee, the Finance Committee, the Small Business Committee, the Armed Services Committee, and the Select Committee on Intelligence. He will also be remembered as the first non-lawyer to serve on the Judiciary Committee. Malcolm served for 18 years in the Senate, and the record reflects that he used his time wisely and well. Although it would be impossible to list everything he was able to accomplish during his service, quite a few milestones stand out that had a great impact not only on his constituents but on people across the whole country. His legislation to cut inheritance and gift taxes was passed by Congress, an achievement that was hailed as one of the major legislative accomplishments of that time on tax reform. He also fought to stop the federal government's effort to control Wyoming's water resources and the taking of private property. Although Malcolm's career had begun right in his own backyard, it wasn't long before he had expanded his sights and considerably began to work on energy and foreign trade issues, which took him to conferences and meetings all over the world. He had a great deal of success in those efforts as he worked to straighten our relationships with our foreign trade partners. Because of his concern about our national defense, Malcolm was heavily involved in the work that was being done internationally on arms control. He was an active participant in a number of those talks. Ultimately, the human rights issues and Western pressure on them helped to bring about the liberation of the Baltics and Eastern Europe. Still, no matter where he was or what he was doing, he never lost his focus on his constituents back home and how they were being affected by what the federal government was doing or proposing. That's why so many in Wyoming will always remember him as a warrior who fought with all his might to put an end to the battle that was going on back then to increase federal regulations and reduce state and local control over many facets of life in Wyoming and the West. He knew it had to be stopped, and he didn't rest until he'd made it happen. Malcolm was a true conservative, and the principles and values that meant so much to him helped to set his inner compass and guide and direct him in everything he did. His commitment to conservative values was so strong it led him to create the Republican Steering Committee, which now includes just about all the Republicans in the Senate. He knew how important it was to create a working group that would serve as a sounding board that would provide guidance and direction for the ideas and proposals that he and other conservatives wanted to offer to control spending, to limit the growth of government, and to ensure freedoms we've all come to cherish as Americans, to see that they would forever be protected and preserved. His love of the outdoor sports led him to champion attacks on hunting and fishing equipment that could only be used for habitat and facilities. Supported by the sportsmen, that provision is still in place, and we protect its use, it to be used for what it was intended. There are just a small handful of items that you could find on a list of Malcolm's. Those are just a few of the items you could find on a list of Malcolm's accomplishments in the Senate. There are many, many more that would be part of the legacy of service, but there's one more at the top of the list that I know is closest to his heart and that I have to mention before I close. Throughout his life, Malcolm was a strong believer in the importance of the volunteer spirit. That's why he proposed the Congressional Awards Program. First of all, it didn't cost anything, which he appreciated as a fiscal conservative. Secondly, it was best described as a challenge issued to young people all across the nation to get up, get active, and get involved down the street, down the block, or across town. It helped young people to realize that no matter the problem, there was something they could do to help solve it. Malcolm proposed the idea, and Congress soon passed it. No other award program is quite like it, and no other award like it is issued by Congress. It's not an easy award to earn, and I'm certain that's how Malcolm intended for it to be. Any young American who has a dream they wish to pursue can earn one of these important awards. Whether it's a bronze, silver, or gold award, each participant sets his own goal and works with an advisor to get there, step by step. They set their own standards in 4 program areas: volunteer public service, personal development, physical fitness, and expedition exploration. How well they do in each of these categories determines which award they will earn. It may be because of Malcolm's status as the founder of the program, but it always seems to me that when the Gold Award winners come to Washington, D.C. for the presentation ceremony, there are more Wyoming winners than those from any other state. Just like Malcolm, I'm very proud of the spirit of my state's young people and the way they answer this and every challenge with enthusiasm and determination to do whatever it takes to succeed. In the years to come, the Congressional Awards will continue to be one of the best parts of Malcolm Wallop's legacy of his service to the nation, and it will inspire and encourage countless more young people to do whatever they can to change the world around them, beginning like Malcolm did, right in their own backyard. It already has a great record of successes, and I can't think of a better way to remember Malcolm Wallop. In fact, it's probably how he would most want to be remembered. After Malcolm had served 3 terms in the state Senate and given 18 more years of his life to the people of Wyoming, Malcolm took another long look on his walk on his ranch and gave it some thought and decided it was time for him not to retire, for someone like Malcolm never slowed down. He just felt it was time for him to change direction. So he announced he was stepping down from the Senate to give someone else a chance to continue the work that must be done to make Wyoming and our nation a better place to live for us all. It wasn't long after leaving the Senate that Malcolm founded an organization called the Frontiers of Freedom to enable him to continue his work to address the issues of personal freedom and the need to keep our government from going too large and too powerful. I always felt, like Will Rogers said so many years before him, that he opened up his office just a short distance from Washington so he'd be better able to keep an eye on us. In the years he served at the helm of the Frontiers of Freedom, it was clear that it reflected the true north of Malcolm Wallop's inner compass. Just like he'd done for so many years, the organization was completely focused on many of the issues he'd worked on in the Senate. And like him, it was much valued and important presence in the ongoing conversation and debate about the direction in which our country was headed and whether or not that needed to change. Now Malcolm's taken from us all too soon. He'll be greatly missed, and he'll never be forgotten. When I learned of his passing, my thoughts turned to those Wyoming senators we've lost over the last few years: Craig Thomas, Cliff Hansen, and now Malcolm Wallop. They may be gone, but their memory will live on and serve to remind us that each and every one of us, Americans all across this country of ours, have something to offer to make a difference in the world. If we don't do what God has sent us here to do, no one else will be able to do it for us. Diane and I join in sending our heartfelt sympathy to Malcolm's family and to everyone who knew him personally and politically, or who followed his public life. He was a remarkable individual who fulfilled life's dream by working hard, always giving the best he had to offer, and constantly looking ahead to the problems that were looming on the horizon so they could be addressed before they became too difficult to handle. At moments like these, I've always believed there's no greater gift that we can give to someone who is grieving the loss of a loved one than to keep them in our thoughts and hold them gently in our prayers. I've found that God has a way of hearing and healing us in our darkest hours. May his presence now be a source of peace and comfort to all those who mourn Malcolm's loss. The knowledge that there are so many who will never forget him in time helped to soften the pain of his passing leaves behind for all who knew him, loved him, and called him their friend. To heal the empty spot in our hearts, I encourage all who knew Malcolm to write down their memories and to share them. I know with full confidence that this will not be the last time that Malcolm Wallop's name will be heard on the Senate floor. In the years to come, we will often think of him and the example he provided on so many things. But for now, let us say goodbye to our friend. He'll be missed, but he'll never be forgotten. I yield the floor to the other senator from Wyoming.
Senator from Wyoming.
Mr. President, thank you. I come to the floor today to honor one of our former colleagues and a dear friend. U.S. Senator Malcolm Wallop died yesterday, September 14, 2011, at his Wyoming home overlooking the majestic Bighorn Mountains. Senator Wallop will be remembered as a unique and enduring figure in the history of Wyoming and in the history of the United States. Malcolm was a stalwart defender of freedom and democracy around the world, and a determined advocate for limited government and opportunity for every person. Like that iconic range in northern Wyoming that he loved, Malcolm stood very tall. As a citizen, as a state and federal legislator, and as a loyal guardian for Wyoming people and our way of life. I want to send my deepest condolences to Malcolm's family back in Wyoming and around the country, to Isabel, his wife, to his beloved children, Malcolm, Matthew, Amy, and Paul, to his dear sisters, Janine and Carolyn. I also want to offer my condolences to all of those folks who worked for Senator Wallop during his years of extraordinary public service. I have met most and have known many over the years. My wife, Bobby served on his very first staff in Washington. And last night she shared with me again what we've all come to know. Malcolm was a kind, a caring, and an extraordinary gentleman. Malcolm's staff served him ably and honorably. I know there are also some in this body today who served alongside Malcolm Wallop. You no doubt remember him well. It was just 4 years ago that Senator Wallop returned here to this chamber and attended my own swearing-in on June 25, 2007. On that day, as is tradition, Senator Wallop walked with me up to the President's desk to take the oath. He stood with me during the ceremony and offered private words of encouragement and advice. I was honored that day to have him there next to me, and it saddens me greatly to join Senator Enzi to announce his death. Malcolm Wallop was someone I followed throughout his career. I admired him greatly. He was a man that many of us looked up to as he grew into one of the most influential legislators of his time. Hello, my friend. That was his classic Western rancher's drawl, and it was what you heard if Malcolm Wallop was on the other end of the phone line or came through the door. Malcolm was a real-life version of anyone's image of a Western gentleman. Today, I remember him as a brilliant servant leader. He possessed a special Western wisdom which often found those around him racing just to catch up. He found great contentment in all of the many facets of his life. Even during recent years when numerous medical challenges conquered his physical body, his spirit and his intellect were never diminished. Public service was his heritage and his calling. His grandfather, Oliver Henry Noel Wallop, founded the Canyon Ranch and Bighorn Mountains of Wyoming in 1888. That's before Wyoming even became a state. Noel had the distinction of serving first in the Wyoming State Legislature and then later in life in the House of Lords in Great Britain. Noel was the youngest son of Lord Isaac Newton Wallop, the 5th Earl of Portsmouth. When Noel's older brothers died, he reluctantly returned to England to fulfill the family duty. However, his own son, Oliver, who was Malcolm's father, he had been grown up and he remained in Wyoming. Malcolm was born in 1933, and Bighorn was always his home. His children and his grandchildren are 4th and 5th generations of his family to make their lives in the beautiful Bighorn Mountain area of north central Wyoming. They ranch, they own businesses, they teach, they raise their children, they serve their community, all those things that we do to make this nation strong. Malcolm was a pilot. He served as a first lieutenant in the U.S. Army. He was a cattle rancher, elected to the Wyoming State Legislature, serving both in the House as well as in the Senate from 1969 through 1976. In 1974, Wallop ran unsuccessfully for governor of Wyoming. But it was during that summer campaign that Malcolm began to distinguish himself as a principled and energetic future force in Republican politics. He didn't shy away from the tough issues. Instead, he seemed to gather strength from the challenges. Only 2 years later, he unseated incumbent U.S. Senator Gale McGee and became Wyoming's 19th senator, serving from 1977 to 1995. When Malcolm was elected to this body in 1976, it was really something. You heard about the commercials from Senator Enzi. Well, a group of young people had gathered around to support his very unlikely bid to serve Wyoming in the United States Senate. The national press called it the Children's Crusade. Many of those young people came to Washington with him, and my wife, Bobby Brown, was among those who began her own public service career as part of his first-term staff. It is an indication of the affection and the loyalty felt by those who were part of his team that more than 60 people gathered together with Malcolm in Wyoming in 2006 for a 30-year reunion. He served 3 terms in the Senate, and his work here was very broad in scope. His presence was lasting, and it touched on the mercurial issues of the late 70s and 80s, from energy policy to the environment, from national security to tax reform. One of our own colleagues, Senator Carl Levin, said of Malcolm, quote, he said, "While we disagreed again, probably as often as we agreed, that didn't stand in the way of my admiration for the quality, the characteristic that he had of letting you know precisely where he stood and why." And he went on to say, and his patriotism is second to none in this body. Malcolm Wallop was the first elected official to propose a space-based missile system, which eventually became part of our Strategic Defense Initiative. He was highly regarded for his knowledge and understanding of defense issues, and surely helped bring the Berlin Wall down. Later in his Senate service, he was a member of the Helsinki Commission, and he traveled in Eastern Europe and the former Soviet Union as an arms control negotiator. Speaking of their strategic partnership, President Reagan said, and I quote, "Leadership, hard work, experience, loyalty to Wyoming. That's what Malcolm Wallop is all about." Malcolm was fiercely protective of states' rights, property rights, the rights to privacy, and he was a champion of the rights of the individual. He is remembered for the Wallop Amendment to the Surface Mining Control Act, a property rights issue which forced the federal government to compensate property owners whose ability to mine was undercut by regulation. He worked successfully to protect states' interest in the Clean Water Act. He brought significant wilderness to Wyoming through the 1984 Wilderness Act. He was a key force behind the passage of the far-reaching 1992 Energy Policy Act. Senator Wallop, on more than one occasion, commented that he, quote, was not burdened with a law degree. And yet he was selected in his very first term to serve on the Judiciary Committee, the first non-lawyer ever so chosen. Perhaps his greatest contribution was his landmark legislation to address the heartbreaking issue of parental kidnapping. He was one of a long and distinguished line of Wyoming senators who served with distinction on the Senate Finance Committee. His 1981 bill to cut inheritance and gift taxes is remembered as one of the most substantive changes to tax policy that decade. He appreciated opportunities which allowed for private-public sector partnerships. Early in his Senate career, there was talk of establishing a national service requirement for young people. But Malcolm felt that if we were going to require young people to serve the nation should recognize them for the service so many were already providing through their daily lives. This resulted in his leadership to establish the Congressional Award. He joined with colleagues in both houses of Congress in a bipartisan effort, and a unique program available to all interested young people in the country was created. It's a program of Congress which operates with private sector funds. It's an earned honor and is the highest honor which we bestow on our nation's young people. The many young people in my state who participate in the Close-Up program do so because Malcolm thought it was an important opportunity for his young constituents. At the time, Close-Up only offered their program in the cities. Well, Malcolm worked to convince the Close-Up Foundation that a statewide program would work, and I believe that Close-Up today counts their Wyoming program as one of its most successful. Malcolm Wallop reached across Capitol Hill. He reached across party lines in the creation of the Aquatic Resources Trust Fund, commonly known as the Wallop-Bro Trust Fund, which has resulted in billions of dollars generated by users for support of fisheries and wetlands around the country. But it wasn't all serious. He was an enthusiastic supporter of his staff's efforts to deal with their homesickness in July. And in July of 1977, they held the first Frontier East, an East Coast celebration of Cheyenne's Frontier Days, which is known simply as Cow Pie. Cow Pie stands for the Committee of Wyoming People in the East. It is still today one of Washington area's most celebrated summer events. My wife Bobby reminds me how absolutely joyful Malcolm was each year on his birthday. And his birthday was February 27th. As Bobby reminds me, that's when his staff organized the Wally Awards, making great fun of themselves and their boss. I'm told the best was the impersonation of him by his chief of staff, Bill Hill. That's the same chief of staff who then went on to serve as Chief Justice of the Wyoming Supreme Court. Malcolm remained forever steadfast against the growth and the power of centralized government. And he warned, as we remain the sheep, the government happily remains our shepherd. He talked often as a senator of our shrinking freedom and the battle to lay claim to our fragile liberty. That was Malcolm Wallop. When he announced his retirement in 1993 after 18 years in the United States Senate, Senator Wallop told the Casper Star-Tribune simply, "I don't think the only place to fight for freedom is in the halls of Congress." His life after the Senate was filled with his continuing work on issues focusing on constitutionally limited government, a strong national defense, and the rights of the individual. To address these issues, he founded the Frontiers of Freedom. He spoke with power and eloquence about the issues which he found to be the core of our great country. In a 2003 interview with Peter Evans, he said, quote, "You'll find in the American people an enormous sense of pride and self-assurance that only comes from people living free. It's unbelievably invigorating and very reassuring to know the great experiment," he said, "is in the hands of people who don't even know it and isn't in the hands of the people who think they hold it." Malcolm Wallop was so many things, but what Malcolm Wallop was not was sentimental. The new phase of his life was the full phase of his life. He did not dwell on past things. His energy was always spent looking forward. I want to conclude today by repeating Senator Wallop's own words. Speaking in 2005 before the Ronald Reagan Gala, sponsored by the Frontiers of Freedom, Senator Wallop spoke about his own beliefs, and I quote, "Government was not meant to possess us, rule us, encompass us, judge for us, substitute for us. It was meant to serve us. We were founded as a noble, self-governing tribe of free people respecting each other as Americans under God, not under Washington. Americans know this even if their government does not. The biggest difference between the principle of government in America and anywhere else is that here the rulers must stick to clearly defined tasks, while ordinary people may do whatever they wish." He goes on to say, "We must make up our minds to put this principle into practice again, lest we lose the spirit that made us the envy of the world. Most important," he said, The American model is based on a certain kind of people, defined not by race but by virtue and by the willingness to take responsibility for our own lives. People fit to be Americans ask for blessings only from God, because being Americans is not a matter of birth. We must practice it every day, lest we become something else. He says the size of our continent, its fabulous wealth, its indescribable beauty, the ships, tanks, and airplanes in our arsenal are no treasure compared to the moral character of the American people. I pray to God, he said, that he will graciously help us preserve and protect that splendid moral base. And that ends his quote. To Isabel and his beloved children, Malcolm, Matthew, Amy, and Paul, to his dear sisters, Janine and Carolyn, we thank you for letting him share so much of his life with us all. There is no question our world is better for the time he spent addressing the great issues of the day, and we are grateful. We can cherish our memories and stories of Malcolm, knowing that he would cast a wry glance and wonder why we weren't spending our thoughts and our energy on a challenge that needed our attention. It's what he would expect of all of us. It's the example that he left for us. It is his legacy. And so today, Godspeed, Malcolm. Mr. President, the U.S. Senate, Wyoming, the United States of America, has lost one of its most steadfast defenders. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor. I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Mr. President.
Senator from Colorado is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd ask the quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection.
Thank you. I went back to the office and I saw that my senior senator was sitting here at this late hour, and I wanted to come down and keep him company. So I'm glad to be here with you tonight. Proud to be from the West tonight with two great senators from Wyoming remembering Malcolm Wallop's service in this body. And it was wonderful to hear their remembrances of him, and I'm glad we were here to share that, being from the West. Like the presiding officer, I spent most of August in our beautiful state, the most beautiful state in the United States, if I do say so myself, in town hall meetings, mostly in red parts of the state, but in red and blue parts of the state. They don't actually think of themselves that way, but that's how Washington would talk about it. And in the town halls, I always start the same way. I say, ask any question that you have, bring any criticism that you have, tell them that I was an urban school superintendent for almost 4 years. It's impossible to hurt my feelings. It's been beaten out of me a long time ago. And then we have a conversation. This time, every single meeting started with somebody saying, what's wrong with you guys? Why can't you work this out in Washington, D.C.? We are struggling in the worst economy that we've had since the Great Depression, and what we see are a lot of political games being played back there. It's a version of a conversation I've heard now for 2.5 years in our state, and then one of the things we get into at the very beginning is the fact that this is the first time, this is not a garden variety recession that we're just coming out of. This is the first time, this last decade, not just this recession, the last decade, it's the first time in this country's history when median family income actually declined instead of going up. Generation after generation after generation of Americans saw their income rise. Median family income sort of shorthand for middle-class family income in this country. It's the backbone of this country. And it's fallen for the first time in a decade as the cost of health insurance doubled on the people that live in Colorado. The cost of higher education went up by 60%, and people are saying, Michael, I have been at my job for this whole decade, and I'm earning less at the end of the decade than I was at the beginning of the decade. And my cost of not, nice to haves, my cost of critical things to move my family ahead, to create stability for me and my small business, like health care, like higher education, have done nothing but skyrocket. And I'm going to show you some numbers that are pretty scary that came out this week from the Census Bureau that reflect in numbers what I'm talking about and reflect how profound the structural issues are that we really face in our economy. Structural issues that don't fit on the back of a bumper sticker or a political slogan or during a debate at night on the television set. This week's Wall Street Journal on Monday had an article on the front page with a headline that reads as follows: As middle class shrinks, P&G aims high and low. P&G is Procter & Gamble. There's not a more iconic brand in our country's history when it comes to the middle class than Procter & Gamble. Mr. President, here are some of the things that they make: Crest toothpaste, Head & Shoulders shampoo, Tide detergent, Pampers diapers. I'm glad to be out of those in my house, by the way. Bounty paper towels, Downy fabric softener, Scope mouthwash, Duracell batteries, Charmin toilet paper, Bounce fabric softener. Nobody needed fabric softener before there was a middle class in this country, but they make it. Mr. Clean, Pepto-Bismol, Pringles, Swiffer brooms and dusters. We have that in our closet. Old Spice deodorant, NyQuil cough syrup, Puffs tissues, Ivory soap, CoverGirl makeup. That's what Procter & Gamble makes. That's what they sold to the great middle class in this country for decades. And here's this article that says Procter & Gamble aims high and low. I wanted to read, I'd like to ask that the whole article be part of the record. Thank you, Mr. President. But I wanted to read a few excerpts from it because I think it's instructive about what we're dealing with. P&G's profits boomed with the increasing affluence of middle-class households, I'm quoting, households in the post-World War II economy. As masses of housewives set up their new suburban homes, P&G marketers pledged that Tide detergent delivered cleaner clothes, Mr. Clean made floors shinier, and Crest toothpaste fought off more cavities. In the decade since, new features like fragrances or ingredient and packaging enhancements kept P&G's growth robust. But what's happening now? For generations, Procter & Gamble's growth strategy was focused on developing household staples for the vast American middle class, said the Wall Street Journal. Now P&G executives say many of its former middle-market shoppers are trading down to lower-priced goods, widening the pools of have and have-not consumers at the expense of the middle. That's forced P&G, which estimates it has at least one product. You heard the list of products, so this won't be surprising. At least one product in 98% of American households to fundamentally change the way it develops and sells its goods. For the first time in 38 years, for example, the company launched a new dish soap in the U.S. at a bargain price, 40 years. P&G's rollout of Gain dish soap says a lot about the health of the middle class. The world's largest maker of consumer products is now betting that the squeeze on middle America will be long-lasting. So if you needed any example of what our families are struggling with in Colorado every single day, here is a business plan that's modeled on a perpetually shrinking middle class by a company whose whole business model, in their whole history, was based on a rising middle class. I'm going to skip the next one in the interest of time, Mr. President, and go right to the end because I wanted to show some numbers. This was conclusion of the article. Quote, to monitor the evolving American consumer market, P&G executives study the Gini Index, a widely accepted measure of income inequality that ranges from 0, when everyone earns the same amount, to 1, when all income goes to only one person. In 2009, the most recent calculation available, the Gini coefficient totaled 0.468, a 20% rise in income disparity over the past 40 years, according to the U.S. Census Bureau. Quote, we now have a Gini index similar to the Philippines and Mexico. You'd never have imagined that, says Phyllis Jackson, P&G's Vice President of Consumer Market Knowledge for North America. I don't think we've typically thought, she said, about America as a country with big income gaps to this extent. I don't think we've typically thought about America that way either. It's fundamentally not who we purport to be, and it's not who we are going to be. But in order to put us on a path that's actually going to produce a rising middle class again, instead of a division among the very wealthy at the top and the poorest of our citizens at the bottom, we're going to have to come together on some pretty serious choices. I know there's been some that argue that this is all a problem that's caused by too many regulations. And I'm the first to say that we should only have the regulation that we need. Or some that say that the threat of any revenue, even at a time when we are collecting less revenue as a percent of our economy than we have over the last 30 years, are saying that any revenue is choking off this recovery. Let me show you something very surprising, Mr. President. This is high-tech Senate stuff. Here are some lines, and I know that people probably can't see the detail at home. You can get it on the website, but let me walk you through them. This blue line, Mr. President, from 1992 to 2010, it's about 20 years. This blue line represents what's called the productivity index. It is the productivity index. And it shows that we have become far more productive as an economy over the last 20 years. And it's not surprising that we have. We have because we have had a technological revolution that has made us more productive. But you see at the very end here, this is where the recession is. Look at what happened to the productivity index during our recession. Because every single month that went by that we were losing jobs, American business was doing what they had to do, which was figure out how to get through this recession and get to the other end, how to wring out every efficiency they could, how to make themselves as productive as they could, and they did. They have. We are much more productive today than we were here. The green line is our gross domestic product, our nation's economy, per capita. The amount of money per person that our economy is generating. Here is an amazing fact. This is where we were before the recession. This is where we are today. Our economy is the same size today as it was before we went into the recession. We're producing about the same economic output as a nation that we were producing before we went into this downturn. I was shocked when I learned those numbers. But look at this. Here is our employment level. Here's our employment level today. We have 14 million people unemployed, but we're producing about the same as we were before we went into this horrible recession. That's a structural unemployment problem. That's not a problem that's going to be solved by slogans. And it's not going to be a problem that's solved by companies that have become much more efficient at what they do. It's going to be solved by companies that are going to be started tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. Small businesses, venture-backed firms, people that are inventing the technology of the 21st century, the products and services of the 21st century, not the products and services of the 20th century. That is the only way that we are going to put these people back to work. We could be investing in our infrastructure, too. That would help. This line is median family income, which is what I started this conversation with. This is a terrible story. It's not just a sad story. It is a terrible story. That's that line again, median family income. It was over $53,000 in 1999. It's $49,000 today. Almost $4,000 less in real dollars in a decade. And I could have brought another slide, next week I will, that shows that this trend has actually been going on a little longer than that. But think about it. You know, it means that half of the families in 99 were earning less than $53,000 and half were earning more than $53,000. Today, half are earning less than $49,000 and half are earning more than that. These are folks that have done absolutely everything that anybody ever asked them to do. But I don't care whether you're a family or a business. It makes it very hard for you to make ends meet if that's the slope that you're on. And I would argue, Mr. President, that we cannot consume one more decade of this new century with economic policies that are leading us here and expect to have a vibrant middle class. I want to be in an economy where Procter & Gamble has to change their business model to catch up with the rising middle class, not be in a position that they're in today where they feel like they have to bet on a falling middle class.